Sony has released a statement saying that they are what was it that yeah, they're halfway through the console generation. And they've backtracked on this. They've tried saying that like, oh, the PS5 is going to last way longer than that. But the meaning was clear, right? Like people picked up on this immediately because it is true. Like the PS5 is not going to last much longer, right? It isn't free fall. It didn't sell that well. It hasn't had a single relevant release. The PS4 hasn't even stopped being supported yet. The PS5 is a complete and abject failure, and nobody wants to admit it, right? This has been a complete disaster of a console generation for both PlayStation and Xbox. But there has been this very stubborn refusal from like the fanboys of both consoles to kind of to accept that, right? Like, oh, the games are coming. Oh, we just have to wait 5 years. Oh, this is gonna be like this amazing console generation. Like PS5 like sold itself purely based on like fan enthusiasm and hype. Like the downright delusional belief that eventually the games are going to come out. Eventually they're going to be great. Eventually the game is going to they're going to prove themselves to be better than the Switch. It's going to be a repeat of the PS3 generation, guys. Just wait until Naughty Dog releases The Last of Us Part 3. I know Part 2 wasn't good, but this is going to be a masterpiece, right? Like it was crazy the lengths everyone went to to like try and pretend that the PlayStation brand was in a stable position, right? When in reality it's been free fall since like 2006, right? With like the $600 PS3, with like all of those like early terrible exclusives, with like all of their major support going under or like going multi-platform or just like falling off. Like PlayStation has been in free fall for a long time, and a big part of that is because like all of their brands that they use to like prop them up, Metal Gear, Final Fantasy, stuff like that. All those franchises that they ran into the ground due to their own poor business decisions. Yeah, they're not coming back. There will be no recovery for Final Fantasy. There will be no recovery for Metal Gear Solid. There will be no recovery for any of these PlayStation IPs because the reality is there are simply better alternatives on Nintendo hardware, right? The issue is, and I've been saying this for a long time, the PlayStation brand, the hardware is too overpowered, right? They need to scale back the costs of the hardware because they are losing money with every unit sold, and software developers have to spend an extraordinary amount of resources to make cutting edge technology instead of simply, making a good video game for a niche audience, right? Nintendo said this back in like the 90s, the 2000s or whatever, and it did turn out to be true is that like we cannot chase graphics, right? Because eventually people are going to get bored of them. They're going to fall off, they're going to lose interest, and then like if we hadn't cultivated our brands, there would be no more interest in our products, right? And in the end, that turns out to be what happened, right? Because in the 2000s, the big push was like for story, for graphics, for realistic visuals, and now 20 years later, people have been like fed so much of that that there is no variety, there is no like distinction between any of these IPs in a lot of ways. They all look the same, they all play the same, they all have like similar tones, like they even all push a similar political ideology, right? There is no variety in Western video game development, right? Like when you compare that to Nintendo, where like even in the same genre, like just compare like 2D platformers like Super Mario Bros. Wonder and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. They look completely different. They play completely different. They have a completely different aesthetic. Completely different like concepts and like unique mechanics that really distinguish them like visually and like stylistically. Like they are completely different games in spite of being the same genre. And that's not even going to games that like 2D platformers that arguably aren't even in the same genre, like Yoshi's Crafted World or Kirby or whatever, right? Like they aren't the same thing at all. Right, the narrative that like Nintendo games are all like identical and don't evolve was always completely ridiculous. But rather, like I think more obviously, uh, that statement more applies to PlayStation. It more applies to the current Western video game market, because those are the developers that are putting out like realistic, like post-apocalyptic shooters, right? Those are the developers that put out The Last of Us, the most generic zombie story ever told, right? These are the developers that put out like nothing good in the past 15 years, right? And I would argue that's been true since 2007 for sure. But like it's only been getting worse every couple of years to the point where even like mainstream audiences are noticing. Like it's crazy to think that like something like Suicide Squad is being like lambasted by the masses. Like, oh, Gotham Knights was way better than this. Oh, Arkham Knight was way better than this. Oh, Arkham City was way better than this. Where like in reality, people like me are kind of sitting there saying that like, Arkham Asylum wasn't very good either. That wasn't some 10 out of 10 masterpiece, right? It's just a game where you play as Batman. That's it. It's not special. It's not interesting. It's not even like the best superhero game. Like the Spider-Man game from like 10 years before it, the N64 one, that was better, right? But have these people ever played that game? Have they ever heard of it? No, of course not. Right? Arkham Asylum wrote off like the Dark Knight hype and like the superhero fad in a lot of ways, and like they got a reputation that they really didn't deserve. But now with Suicide Squad, with them literally taking the legacy of Kevin Conroy's Batman and shooting it in the face, like uh you can't pretend anymore, right? Like the issue is if you're a legit fan of these games, like if you keep playing them, eventually you're going to notice that you're not having fun anymore. And that is what all of this comes down to. People may be delusional about Red Dead Redemption 2, like falling off and not being relevant, right? People may be delusional about like Overwatch 2 and like about Baldur's Gate 3 being game of the year, right? People may try to tell you Baldur's Gate 3 is like one of the best games ever made or the game of the generation or whatever. People may like lie about Nintendo games that they never played and say that like Tears of the Kingdom isn't like a spectacular Zelda game. Like people may do that, but the reality is the people who actually play the games, the people who actually matter, right, are going to be having those thoughts. Even if you downplay a game like Star Fox Zero, eventually people are going to go back and play it and realize that, like, wow, this game is not as bad as gaming journalists led me to believe, right? Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is the same way, right? Wow, this game is way better than Baldur's Gate 3, I think is what, like, most people who played it will tell you, right? You know, there is no suppressing the reality of the situation anymore, I think. The issue now, when it comes to like the current state of PlayStation titles, is that like they are promoted and hyped purely out of like blind fan loyalty and like delusions, right? As opposed to people who actually like playing video games, right? And that is why PlayStation will never, ever succeed. They are on the way out, and they will soon, much like Xbox is, go third party and give Nintendo a complete monopoly over the video game market. The PlayStation brand has and always has been a complete failure.